Jesus walks up to him and says, "Follow me." And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. Okay, relatively simple, but fairly interesting. Jesus is a traveling rabbi, and he's picking out disciples, picking out followers. This is something that rabbis did. And then the there was a Jewish saying at the time about how um, the students of the rabbi are basically supposed to be covered in the dust of his feet. So they're supposed to follow along with him and do everything that he does and learn from him by kind of discussing and debating with him and his followers and things like that. So um, that's what. So when Jesus says, "Follow me," it's not like this is some weird thing. They would at the time. He would at the time know what Jesus is asking of him. So he leaves everything and rises up and follows him. Okay. All right. So that's that. Before we go on to the next part, we have a guy named here Levi. Do we know a Levi by another name potentially amongst the disciples? Yes. If I'm asking the question, it's probably a pretty good indication that we do. Who is this? Who do we know this guy by? Yeah, this is Matt. Yep. Good.
Matt.
That this is Matthew. He's got his own book. Exactly. Yeah, this is the guy who has his own gospel. Yeah, so this is Matthew. All right. So now Levi, parentheses Matthew, has a great feast at his house. So at his own expense, he's paying for a great feast. And there were a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at the table with them. Not really surprising that he hangs out with other tax collectors, since that's probably the only people that'll hang out with them. Those and the hated Romans, right? So this is probably a predominantly collaborator, if you will, if we can use that term, traitor audience and Gentile audience. Okay, so other people were reclining at the table with them. That's how they recline around a table when they were eating. So that's why they're using that word there. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Uh, but but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Okay, so the tax collectors come probably the day later, probably not at the festival or not at the festival, but the the dinner. Yeah, I know, right? Um, because the Pharisees and the scribes wouldn't be caught dead at a feast with these people. Okay, so this is probably the next day. They come to his disciples, which is interesting, not Jesus, and ask him about this. Okay, so why are they all upset about this? The word for grumbled there, by the way, is a word that has kind of a stronger meaning than the original Greek, more of like harangued or complained at or harassed. It's kind of the meaning. So they're harassing um, their internet lynch mobbing the disciples. They're going on a Twitter rant, if you will, about this. Why are they doing that? What are they so indignant about? Why is it a big deal that they were eating with the tax collectors?
Because they were bad.
Right. But in today's culture, like if I hung out with okay, well, not hang out with. If I went to a dinner and there was obviously there's a big political divide in the U.S. right now, right? Democrats, Republicans, yay for that. If I went to a dinner with a bunch of whoever was on the other side of the aisle from me, um, like there
Who
wouldn't
is
be
on the other side of the aisle from you? Actually, who isn't on the other side of the aisle from you?
high five. Yeah. Oh yeah. So if I went to dinner with some people from a different political perspective than me, like there are some extremists who would get worked up about that, right? But for the most part, I don't think people would come and like talk behind my back about it to my friends, right? But they are doing that here. And it's a big deal, right? Like they're haranguing them, attacking, kind of verbally like accosting them about this. What's the big deal?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, why are they so worked up about Jesus just going to a feast with some of these people at it?
So was Rib's answer not the right answer?
Yeah, it sort of. Because it's more than just hanging out with these people. There's something else culturally going on here. Sharing a meal with someone in this time, what does that mean?
Friendship.
Oh, sorry. I lost my volume for a second there. Say that again. Yeah. Friendship, approval, some level of trust. Okay. So the Pharisees are interpreting Jesus sharing a meal with these guys as approval. And they're not necessarily outside the they're not outside the cultural understanding of this, right? Like this is something that would even Greeks would understand. Luke is writing to a predominantly Greek audience. Greeks would look at this and go, "Oh yeah, like sharing a meal with someone is a some level of trust, friendship, approval with this, right?" So they see this as a moral compromise to go to a dinner with these people. And in a sense, it does look kind of bad, right? Like because here's Jesus, who's a rabbi, a Jewish teacher, going and eating and hanging out with and sharing a meal, which is a sign of trust and relationship building with people who are quote unquote the enemy to the Pharisees, right? These are compromisers. These are guys who are hanging out with the pagans and funding the pagans. So, like when it's an association is often equated with affiliation or approval, they're seeing that as this. So if they say, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" So they ask the disciples this. Why do you think Jesus answers instead of the disciples?
Can't speak for the disciples, but something tells me Peter's probably sitting in the corner going, that's a really good question, Lord. Kind of looking at him, kind of like, Jesus, you want to take this one for us?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair way to read this. Is the disciples are like, I don't know. That's a good question. Right, especially since they haven't been. I mean, the way that Luke phrases this, at least, doesn't sound like they've been following him for a super long time. Jesus is still gathering disciples, right? So new like you're following this up and coming rabbi, this great teacher. The religious rulers, Pharisees, scribes, people who are definitely more experienced in this world, and who you probably also look up to as the disciples, come and ask you some questions about like, what is your guy doing? And you're like, I don't know. I haven't followed him long enough, right? Like, you're probably even a little bit uncomfortable about this whole going and hang out with tax
Mm-hmm.
collectors thing, especially if you're one of the zealots, like we know some of the disciples are, who are
Oh,
sworn
now,
enemies of the tax collectors and the Romans. So much so that the zealots had a branch called the Sicarii. They were known for
ooh.
execute for high profile public assassinations. you'd be in a crowd, and all of a sudden there'd be a tax collector who would just fall dead with a hole in his neck from a Sakari blade, right? These guys made a point of making examples of people like
making
this. Yeah,
making a point.
yeah.
Oh, look at you.
But they made examples of people like this, and now you're one of those guys, who's one of Jesus' followers, and you're hanging out at a freaking party, sharing food and drink with these guys. And now the religious rulers are like, "What are you doing?" And you're like, "I honestly don't know." So the fact that Jesus has to answer shows that the disciples don't really have an answer yet, which is fine. Again, we've talked about how we're not expecting these guys to know everything right at the beginning, right? We wouldn't. So Jesus pipes up and answers and says, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Okay, so what's he talking about? What does his answer mean?
I'm pretty sure he explains himself later on.
Yeah, he does circle back to this theme later. Yep. But like Winged said too, he's also he's pretty clear saying what's happening, right? He's like, these people need me. These people need God. So these are the people I'm going to go minister to, right? A physician, we wouldn't think much of an ER doc who refused to go to work during COVID, right? He's like, I am going to social distance during COVID and just stay at home and work from home. We wouldn't think much of a person like that, right? Right? Like, it's like, okay, you literally signed up for this. Your job is to go in and treat people, right? Like, that's what you need to be, where the sick people are. Now, the rest of us, like, a little different story, but a doctor, a physician, a healer should be where the sick people are, right? So, Jesus is basically saying it shouldn't be a big surprise I'm hanging out with these people because they're the ones who need me. I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance, right? So he's like, I'm, I'm I'm out trying to get followers and minister to and teach the sinners who need to be taught. Now, he is going to circle back to this in the next series of verses. So Rib is correct. We're going to that's why we're looping the next set of verses into this set as well. But yeah, so he's basically saying, I'm going to people that need me. Like Wingus said, it's a clear definition of the intent of his ministry. It's almost a mission statement. All right. Any questions on that? Comments to the story before we move on to the next set of interactions? Okay.
I almost feel like you're trying to dodge the second half of my statement. But we can skip it for now.
There's a much less thinly veiled shot coming up.
That's true.
So we're saving it for that.
Yeah. Okay.
I will be the first to admit that for most of my life the next set of verses is actually very confusing to me. So we're gonna ask you guys to interpret it, but if you get it wrong, or don't feel like you don't stay quiet because you're afraid of getting it wrong. So all right. So verses 33 through 39. Who can read those for me or for us?
I can.
Go for it.
And they said to him, the disciples of John fast often and offer prayer, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours eat and drink. And Jesus said to them, Can you make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days. He also told them a parable. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it over an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wineskin into old wineskin. If he does, the new wineskin will burst the skin, and it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins, and no one, after drinking old wine, desires new, for he says, The old is good.
Okay. Thank you. So, not being a connoisseur of wine or wineskins, that second part might be a little confusing for some of us. Unless you are, in which case, more power to you, and please explain it to us. No. But yeah, so let's break this down. So the the this is a continuation of the conversation from above. So the Pharisees and the scribe, the religious elite, come up and start asking the disciples questions. The disciples are like, "Ooh." And so Jesus steps in, answers the question. Okay. Notice they start by asking the disciples about Jesus. And then when Jesus starts talking, they ask Jesus about the disciples. So their question is, um, why are your disciples not fasting and instead they're feasting? They're going to parties. Okay. What does Jesus say to them? He gives them a parable in response. So what's kind of the gist of what he says in response?
Why should they fast since I'm here?
Yeah. Now, does that make any sense if Jesus is just a regular rabbi? No. No. This is a low-key claim to deity here. Okay. If anything, we'd expect the rabbi to be teaching the disciples how to fast. Instead, instead, we're saying Jesus is saying, because I'm here, they don't have to fast. Okay. So that's certainly a claim to authority there. What's interesting is he also predicts his death and ascendancy, right? So the day will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they'll fast in those days. Um, just in case you didn't think we shouldn't be fasting. Um,
Yeah, note the assumed,
Yeah.
the assumption in that statement.
not just that like they should, but they will. So there is assumption that it will be happening. But that's a totally different topic for a different night. Yeah. So he says they don't have to while I'm here, but when I go, they will. Which again is interesting because this is something outside the ordinary. But now Jesus talks to them about something else. He starts talking about garments. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. If he does,
Sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I kind of feel like even the wedding guest and bridegroom part is kind of a parable too, because if someone just brings up wedding guests and bride, you really have to like think about it, what that person is saying. He's not answering directly.
It's true. So what do you think the meaning of the wedding guest and bridegroom is then?
Right, it's referring to, Christ being the bridegroom and his body, the bride.
Yeah. Yep. Israel, his body, exactly. The church. Yep. And at a wedding feast, right? The bride and groom are the ones that it's about, and the guests are there to honor them. So you wouldn't go to a wedding and fast, right? That'd be selfish. Even the Pharisees wouldn't do that. You go there to feast because it's a time for It's a time for feasting. It's a time for joy. A time to take it all in. So that's what Jesus is saying that it is for the disciples because he's there. When he's not there, different story, right? Yeah, so that him describing himself as the bridegroom is a claim to authority as well. Good. Thanks for pulling that out, Rib. So he goes on to answer with another parable too. He talks about this old garment and new garment. So you don't tear a patch from a new garment to put on an old garment, right? So if I actually had this problem the other day. I was running a plate carrier at a match, and it is what it sounds. It carries plates, not like dinner plates, but like armored plates. And not during the match, but afterwards, I set it up on something, and somebody knocked it over. It fell and ripped. Um, so I ordered because it's always a good excuse to order another plate carrier, right? So I got a different plate carrier and patched the old plate carrier. Now I have two plate carriers. But I wouldn't. It would have been absolutely ridiculous for me to take when a new plate carrier comes, just cut off a piece and then patch it on the old plate carrier, right? That'd be stupid. Why would that be stupid?
You'd be ruining the new one to fix the old.
Yeah, I'd be ruining the new one to fix the old, and it wouldn't even fit, right? Because their one has shrunk and in different ways, so that patch still needs to shrink and age. It's not going to do it at the same rate as the rest of the plate carrier. So instead of just having one problem, now I have two problems, right? I would have ruined both. Yeah. Okay. So we go, that's interesting. And he continues on and says, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. Okay, what does that mean? What's going on there?
Oh, I'm eager to see these answers. Ooh.
Ooh. We're going to circle back to Nate's in a moment here.
Yes, we will.
I read R.C. Sproul's commentary in preparation for this.
No.
R.C. Sproul, Nate, he is from heaven somewhere, like just so happy with Nate right now.
Oh. Yep. Oh, we're gonna.
I think it also.
Joey.
Oh, I have another
Nope,
theory.
that's all you, Rip. Go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, it's concerning what Nader, I guess, mentioned. Are we talking about that yet, or should I just?
No, go for it.
So I could see it in the covenant sense, but I also can see it as like in a spiritual sense, as in like the heart of flesh versus like a heart of stone, and like I guess trying to make someone with the old view trying to accept the new view, they need a completely new heart. I don't think I'm explaining it the way it was going on in my head.
I think you're a lot closer to the actual answer than you realize.
I think you are. I think that's a very good way of looking at this. Yeah. Yep. Especially in light of Jesus' comments in John about some people needing to be born again, reborn, right? Born anew, a spiritual birth. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what he's referring to here first, because this would be much more familiar to his audience than us. Again, unless you work at a vinery where you are using wineskins instead of oak barrels, in which case, more power to you. You're a way cooler person than me. So what would happen is they would take. Obviously, we know that wine is grape juice that's fermented, right? Not just grape juice, not well, but actually aged, fermented in a certain way to bring out a certain alcohol content, right?
Just over here like Baptist intensify.
Fermented in a certain way to bring out the flavor, the enjoyment, and then also for this time period, the sanitation, right? Water is generally Clean water is generally kind of sketch to come by, hard to come by. That have water treatment plants and whatnot at this time. So a certain alcohol level of wine is much more pure and healthy than water is at this time. Now, generally, their content is lower than what we do nowadays, although not always. It kind of depends on what we were using the wine for. Okay, there was good wine and bad wine, strong wine, weak wine back then, just like there is now. So, part of the winemaking process, instead of using oak barrels like we do, because we've talked about how wood is really scarce in Israel, um, it wasn't always, but it's certainly more scarce than it is for us North Americans. And it they wouldn't use wood to ferment their wine. They would put it in wineskins. So a wineskin is basically an animal skin. It can be a goat skin, um, other sorts of skins, where the neck is kind of the neck of the skin. They sew it all watertight. They put the wine in there, and then the wine ferments. As part of the fermenting process, it's creating gases and actually kind of expanding the skin. So they dry the skin first, obviously. Put the wine in. The wine ferments, expands. The skin kind of expands and grows around it as well. The skin is also drying and changing throughout this whole process too. Okay. If you were to put new wine into old wineskins, so say you took some new wine, you dropped it into an old wineskin that has some old wine in it as well. That wine skin is going to be put under pressure because that wine still needs to ferment and it's going to change the wineskin. If you did that to an old wineskin, the old wineskin would burst and disintegrate and you would lose all the wine. Okay. So you'd lose the skin and the wines and it'd be pointless. It'd be stupid. It'd be like this is why he moves to this illustration from the new garment to old garment illustration. Okay. New wine must be put in a new wineskins that can still stretch and move and change with the wineskin. Okay. Okay, so that's the wineskins, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment here. But we don't want to miss the verse 39, because here's the dig on the Pharisees. And no one, after drinking old wine, desires new, for he says the old is good. Okay. Now, you don't even need to be a connoisseur of wine to know that this is actually a true statement. People don't want wine that's brand new that hasn't been fermenting that long. Generally, you want an older known year, right? Um, I was at a philosophy discussion night with one of my really good friends there night, and we all like brought either an appetizer or a drink, and he brought a bottle of wine that said 1942 on it. And I'm like, really? It's wine from
Dang.
1942? Dang! He's like, yeah. He goes. So it was $20. He goes, it's based on a 1942 vintage, but it's not actually it. They're just trying to get the same flavor as that year because that year was known as a good year. But they put the old year on it because they want people to think, quality. This is a good old wine, right?
They lied to you.
Right. It's called advertising, the real oldest profession, um, the real world's oldest profession, advertising, right? So yeah, that's what's going on. Is they older wines tend to be better, especially known good years. So people who like older wines would never be like, oh, I want to try that new one that's going to be better. No, no, no. The old one is good. So why would you change? Okay. All right. So that's the parables broken down. What does this all mean?
What do you say we circle back around to Nate's answer?
So I want to mention the silence here first because I'm not judging you guys. This is what I generally did up until a few years ago when I'd read this passage. I'd be like, okay, and on to chapter 6. Sounds good.
I missed the question.
So we broke down kind of the logistics behind the illustrations, but what do these parables mean? What's the meaning of it? What's he saying to the Pharisees? That's the question. Nate, indicated it could be covenant.
Man, we're not even 6 chapters in. Jesus is bringing straight fire.
Nate, do you want to expand your answer a little bit about how this is related to the covenants or covenant? While he's doing that,
I think you better go ahead. I probably butcher the answer because yeah, I don't want to. It would come across better from you than it would from me.
You have
So
no guarantee of that.
no, go for it. This is a judgment-free zone. If you want to go for it, like obviously I'm not pressuring you, but if you want to go for it, go for it. Since he's not unmuting his mic, I'm assuming he does not want to go for it. Okay.
You know.
So there are multiple ways to read this. I do think that certainly there is a covenant element of this. What do I mean by that? So the Pharisees were very focused on the law, right? The idea that we are Jews because we follow the law, and being a good Jew means following the law really well. That's how we become closer to God, is by doing good works and following His word precisely. Okay, and Jesus is saying that what He is preaching is different than that. So that is an old way of doing things. Now, regardless if that's the accurate interpretation of the old covenant, that's an entirely different question that we'll get to at a different point. Not tonight, because we'll be here for hours. But regardless if that's an interpretation, correct interpretation of the old covenant or not, that's the interpretation of the time, right? The Pharisaical interpretation. And Jesus is saying this is something different than that. What he's preaching is not that. So the question that they ask about the tax collectors and staying separate from sinners, and then the question that they ask about the religious actions, the devout actions of fasting that the disciples should be doing to earn God's favor. Those two questions for Jesus spawn these parables. And what Jesus is saying is your questions are showing that you don't understand what I'm doing. You're looking at a way of doing this which is different than what I'm preaching. This isn't about purity through separation. This isn't about purity through works. This is about something different. This is something totally new compared to what you're used to. And I can't combine the two, right? It can't be what Jesus is doing plus what the Pharisees are putting forward, because that doesn't make sense for either one of them. That's why he gives the illustrations about the garments and the wineskins. You can't mix them. They're incompatible. And in verse 39 is him basically saying what? It's him saying, you won't understand. Because you prefer the old way of doing it, your way of doing it, you won't get this because you're happy with it. You think the old wine is good, so you're not even going to try the new wine. So, in answer to their questions about why he's doing it, why he's doing things the way he's doing it, why he's eating and affiliating, compromising his witness in a way, if you will, to use the Christianese, to hang out with to minister to tax collectors and sinners. Why he's doing that? Jesus is basically saying you wouldn't get it. You're so locked into your way of looking at this that you're not going to understand what I'm doing. And we can't mix the two. We can't mix my way of doing it with your way of doing it. Okay. Now, I think that's at one level certainly the proper way to read this. There is a second possible level, and that's the covenants, right? So, if we're saying that the old covenant was about works, then we could say that Jesus is bringing a totally new covenant, something totally different than what the Pharisees are espousing. Okay. I think that's a good reading of this as well. I would be cautious about a full replacement instead of a fulfillment, because there's limitations to parables. But yeah, I do think that's a good way to look at this as well, though, is that we're approaching God differently with Jesus than we did before. So in that sense, it's it's an adapted covenant, a new covenant, if you will. I think that's a good way of looking at it. So yeah, both ways I think is probably a good way to look at it. There's at least two levels of truth on this. What do you guys think? Does that make sense?
I thought it was interesting, the whole tearing off a piece from the old to put on the new. And it's like, if you're going to keep one point of the law, it's not going to work. It's all or nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it.
At any rate, it's regardless of which side you take, whether you take one, take the other, or take both. The truth of the matter is Jesus basically saying, "Look, I've come to shake things up.
Yep.
What worked in the past ain't gonna work no more. Everything, I know I posted the gift. The party don't start till I walk in, but Jesus is coming. This isn't as strictly a call or a declaration of his deity as much as some of the others that we've seen and will see. But this is, right up there along those lines. He is just straight up saying, I'm really important, and the fact that I'm here is going to change everything. And so if you can't change your way of thinking, then I can't work with that.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. And he's because he's saying this is going to be different than what you're preaching, and you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like just letting you know up front, this is not going to be comfortable.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of what he's saying here, is like, because they're low key attacking, they're attacking him on this, and he's like, oh, it's gonna get worse. Don't worry. This is totally different than what you were preaching. Just in case you thought we were the same. So, yeah, I was when I was in Israel, I was privileged to spend a day with a rabbi, who was explaining to us theology in the Second Temple period, which is the time that Jesus is preaching at this time. So it's really interesting. He went through some commentaries and stuff that were around at the time. And his interpretation of Jesus was that he was a Pharisee, who was criticizing the Pharisee from the inside and just trying to purify Pharisee teaching. This guy is a very smart guy, has been studying the scriptures way longer than me. However, I would contend that this passage right here directly addresses that and says, no, that's not what Jesus is doing. Jesus doesn't claim to be doing that. He claims to be doing the opposite of that. He's preaching something totally different. So
Jesus walks up like, "Viva la revolución."
yeah, yep. All right. That's all I have for this week. If you guys don't have anything else to add, next week we're going to continue this conversation because it rolls right into chapter 6. There's an incident that happens, and then Jesus circles back to this topic and hits it again a little harder because the Pharisees aren't getting it. And it is interesting because as you read, if you don't understand like what he's saying in some of these illustrations, you read the the Gospels, that's like, why are the Pharisees getting so aggroed, right? Like, why are they just going absolutely like bananas, like totally out of their minds? And it's like,
Sure, tilted.
yeah, exactly, tilt, like, and it's because Jesus' statements against the like some of these statements, caged in these statements, are pretty harsh attacks on them. So that's why we're spending some time on this to pull it apart. And he's going to circle back and aggro them again next week. So, all right, let's close out in prayer. Any prayer requests?